Thanks for pressing play. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Oracle NetSuite. Learn how to turbocharge the growth of your business today at netsuite.com/legends. My guest, Dr. Darold Treffert. He's the world's leading expert on savants, genius, and autism. He's a psychiatrist. He was the guy who was the consultant on Rain Man to make sure they got it right in the movie. As I've gotten to know Dr. Treffert over the last several months, this is his second appearance on Legends and Losers, I've realized that this man is one of the most amazing people I've ever met. His commitment to children, his commitment to learning, his deep understanding of the human brain and of what makes human beings is extraordinary. In addition to that, his commitment to making a difference in the world is pretty much unparalleled. We have a life-affirming conversation. He shares some incredible stories, and I believe our dialogue today will inspire you to embrace a whole new way of looking at life. All right. The Ramones said, hey ho, let's go, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Hello, my legendary friends. This is Christopher, and man, am I ever glad you've joined us for this episode of Legends and Losers. Dr. Treffert is an extraordinary human being, and we have an illuminating conversation, one that I think that you're going to love. So I've been reading Dr. Treffert's book, Reflections. It's wonderful. I want to tell you what it says on the front of this book. It says, to cure sometimes, to help often, to comfort always. And it's one of the greatest lines I've ever heard. To cure sometimes, to help often, to comfort always. This is a man who's been studying autism, savant syndrome, and really the human mind for over 50 years. And we sit down with him for the second time and have an extraordinary conversation that I know you're going to love. He's literally been on every media outlet you can be on: CBS Sunday Morning, NPR, ABC, NBC, CNN, Dateline NBC, 60 Minutes, and many others. Here he is, a man I'm glad to call my friend, Dr. Darold Treffert.
Very well. We're very busy. Part of the reason I started the center was because we had a waiting list for kids who needed evaluations. Sometimes 9 or 12 months, the parent would have to wait to get an evaluation. So I started our center to offset the waiting list. And of course, now we have a waiting list. So, but our response to that is not just to expand, but to take on the role of teaching the teachers and teaching the therapists and spreading what we do by that method rather than just making more slots available and hoping to sort of infiltrate, so to speak, some of the existing centers or even starting newer centers. And so but I've been, when I started, 60 some years ago with the children's unit at Winnebago, our kids tended to be 10 or 12 or 13 years old. And now they're 2.5 or 3-year-olds. And it is just an amazing difference the early intervention makes. And I think we'll see the payoff of that eventually in terms of preventing some of the impairments that go with autism if not intervened early. So I've been surrounded by children again, like I was when I started, and it's just fun.
And if I remember, and maybe this is just stating the obvious, but you're a big advocate of early intervention, early testing, etc.
Yes, and there are many of the counties or areas of the country have a birth to 3 intervention program for parents to have their children evaluated without consideration to cost and so forth and so on. And that's fine, except I think we'd like to see them even earlier. and the difference is in progress is really very, very striking and very, very pleasing.
And so ideally, what's the age that you think children with these differences, should be diagnosed and then get into the kinds of programs that you folks offer?
Probably about age 2.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm also curious to ask you, Doctor, when you're teaching other professionals, whether they're doctors or other healthcare providers, what are the kinds of things, if I was a doc or a healthcare provider that wanted to follow in your footsteps, so to speak, what are the kinds of things you'd be teaching me?
Well, we have what's called the Trafford Approach, which involves 5 or 6 specific steps. And the first step is to make the right diagnosis and do that carefully. By that I mean, instead of putting down a diagnosis of autism, to put down a differential diagnosis, possibly autism, and leaving the door ajar for those children, especially those who read early or speak late, to recover from the autistic traits that they have. The second point is the early intervention to, and as I said, as early as 2 or 3. Thirdly is to use a multidisciplinary approach. And by that I'm talking about a mix of ABA training, traditional behavioral training, coupled with occupational therapy. Many of these kids have sensory issues, are very sensitive to sound, and speech and language therapy. And some of them require specific psychological treatment beyond the behavioral intervention. I have one little child we have is really doing very well, except she really has a fear of failure, and will recoil or pull back from doing things because of her fear of failure, and that is something which she can be addressed separately.
I hate to interrupt you, Doctor, but don't we all have a fear of failure? Isn't that a natural human thing?
Yes, it is, but for some people it's paralyzing, and they simply won't move ahead because of the fear of failure. But I think that anticipation or anxiety about a new venture and perhaps failing is pretty universal. But most of us kind of bite our lip and move ahead and do the thing, and don't recoil entirely.
As we say in boxing or mixed martial arts, bite down on your mouthpiece and get back in there.
Yeah, that's right.
So how do you teach someone like that who maybe has an extreme fear of failure to, get back in there, so to speak?
Well, that really is a psychotherapy kind of intervention. Some of it is behavioral, but building their confidence, giving support, doing some modeling or a play acting, and having them have a sense of succeeding rather than failing, and hoping that'll generalize. And she, by the way, is venturing out much more than she did before. Then another thing is carefully involving the parents in what we're doing. That many times the parents are really the experts on their own children, and I'm amazed at some of the insights and intuition and just intuition that parents have, and we need to pay attention to that and to follow that, and then to have the multidisciplinary approach, not just each of the disciplines doing their own thing with the child, but working together as a team instead of in isolation. In other words, it's like if you have a medical problem and your family doctor sends you to the specialist, and the specialist involves another specialist, because of it's important that they all interact with each other. And I think many times patients end up feeling with sort of splintered care because the clinicians don't seem to be necessarily interacting with each other. So it's all of those things in a combined approach that is working.
And I'm curious, doctor, and look, this may be a completely naive question, but sort of taking if I could maybe describe it this way, as a 360-degree view, sort of what's the environment the child or person is in, diet, exercise, other people in this child's life, circumstances around the child. How much do these things play into your thinking, or do they?
Well, indeed they do. I think that the environment plays a huge part in the some say, and actually in some cases plays a huge part in the production of the condition itself. It may be trauma related in the child's life, but certainly in an ongoing way, the role of the family and the teachers and other siblings plays a huge role, so that the family interaction and conferencing together with the parents is extremely important, and environment can play a huge role in what happens.
So much of our last conversation, Dr. Treffert, is just rings and rolls around in my head. And one of the things you shared, I think it was about a little boy who had a quote unquote nervous breakdown.
Right.
And do you remember the story that you shared with
me?
I do. When you said to me that his definition of a nervous breakdown is when nobody loves you, it knocked me down then, and every time I think about it, I've listened to our episode multiple times because I learn something new every time I listen to you. I would love it if you elaborated maybe a little bit more. It may be corny a question, but the role of love in all of this.
Well, when we talk about environment, I'm including that love as a vital ingredient. And this little guy, nervous breakdown, he said, I asked him, I said, Billy, how come you had to come here? And he said, I had a nervous breakdown. And I said, what's a nervous breakdown? Well, he said, a nervous breakdown is when nobody loves you. And in his case, that had a solid foundation in terms of the things that were feeding into his feeling of abandonment and loneliness and rejection. So one of the things that's been impressive to me is when I get emails every day from parents looking for some answers for they always start, I've got a son or daughter who, and then they'll describe what it is they're, both the strengths of the child as well as what the questions they have. And I always conclude my letters back to them saying that the fact that you even reached out to me is evidence of your love and pride in your child. And love is a good therapist too. And that is not just with the autistic kids or others, but in my whole psychiatric practice. Love is a good therapist. And it just is, as I said, it shines through these letters. And to me, that already is a good beginning, because there's that evidence of the pride in what the child does, not the regrets about what the child can't do. And they put first that, the strengths, and then end up with some questions about the deficits. And that's our program at the center, is that it's a strength-based approach, both for the kids that have special needs, which are about 20% of our population, and about 80% of our kids are just ordinary youngsters. And we have a strength-based curriculum for them as well. Because so often I think in the school systems, there's emphasis on with testing on what the child can't do, and not enough emphasis or really seeking what the child can do. And that requires a really search sometimes to uncover, especially when the child has many impairments, to look for that kernel of intactness, as I call it, because in each of these kids, no matter how impaired they might be, there is this island of intactness, and our job is to find that, and then to nurture it, to love it, to reward it, to celebrate it, because from that comes other abilities. And the kids when I had my birthday this year, the kids had a little birthday party for me, and they presented me with this huge banner that says, "Thank you for finding my island of intactness."
Oh, wow. That's so great.
And I've got that laminated, and it's going to be up on the wall, because that was the highest compliment that I could have had. And it
must have been one hell of a birthday present to get.
It was quite a party. And that, in answer to your question, that as vital as all these interventions and so forth might be, that ingredient of love, and by love I'm talking about that not just from the parents, but from the teachers and from the therapists and from the volunteers. I mean, we have volunteers who come and work with these kids, and the fact that they come and volunteer is evidence of their. We're part of the Agnesian healthcare system, and some of the sisters come as volunteers, and by the same token, right next to us is the nursing home where some of the elderly nuns are housed, and we take regular trips over there too, and to light up their life.
I love it. Now, I'm curious, you said something, doctor. You think approximately 20% of us are, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but different and need something outside of the normal school system? Or how should I think about this 20%?
Well, the 20% are kids with special needs, have a diagnosis of autism or some other developmental disability. And 80% of our children in the classrooms are just ordinary kids. And that same percentage is fairly true of the whole educational system, that as many as 20% of youngsters in the regular school system have developmental delays, autism, or oral learning problems, or speech and language problems. So we're sort of replicating, I guess, what a mainstream classroom would look like.
But tailor-made for that 20% of us.
Yeah.
And you would include folks like me with dyslexia and executive function problems and
yes,
dyscalculia and
learning.
Best I could tell, I have 5 of these things that somehow interact with each other.
Sure. No, that certainly speech and language difficulties, learning difficulties, along with mental retardation or autism, that whole group together. And I think the school system, should be particularly sensitive to and developing techniques for children who have learning disabilities like dyslexia, and tailoring approaches to that group, so they don't, so that there just is better outcome.
Yeah, and my hope is that there's a lot more awareness about this. I'm no expert, of course, but the interactions that I have with young people in my life who we've had suspicions might have dyslexia or things along those lines. I've been surprised to find the modern school system, at least in California, somewhat ignorant of this. One of my nephews, it turns out he doesn't, but at one point we thought he might be dyslexic. And his mother my sister-in-law went to his school and said, we'd like to investigate this. And one of his teachers said, well, why don't we just have him go through the next year and see how he does? And if you still feel the same way in a year from now, then maybe we can look into it. And again, I'm no expert, but I thought that was an asinine approach.
Yeah, no, that's just a put off. It's like we used to let the child, let's put him into the next grade, and let him
see how that goes.
Yeah, see how that goes, and then he'll be out of my classroom.
Now, Doctor, I'm also curious to ask you, since the last time we were together, we were privileged enough to have John and Mark Cronin, the co-founders of John's Crazy Socks, on Legends and Losers. And this is a wonderful business that I think you would be intrigued to find out about. Mark is the dad, John's the son. John's in his early 20s, and John has Down syndrome. And after John graduated high school, his father, Mark, asked him, John, what would you like to do now? What would you like to do next? And John, the son, said, Dad, I'd like to start a business with you. And John's very creative and I guess always liked sort of colorful, snazzy socks. And so about a year and a half or so ago, Doctor, they started this company online called johnscrazysocks.com, and they're having tremendous success. They're getting a lot of attention, so much so the folks at Google for Father's Day actually put a little ad under the Google search bar promoting John's Crazy Socks. And in my conversation with John and Mark, and this may also be like a no kidding, but it was a awakening for me. Mark said, and it was very clear in the way John had things to say, that being creative, having a job, in this case, being an entrepreneur and starting a company and having an outlet for his creativity, for his passion, creating a company that employs others, in their case, approximately 30% of their employees are what they call differently abled, like John is. And it became very clear to me, because Mark made it clear to me, the dad, that one of the reasons for starting a company was there was no job that Mark could figure out where John could go, where he could be fully expressed. And so they sort of had to create one. And now, he's doing this. He's doing what many of us want to do, which is create something special and earn money doing it and try to make a difference doing it. Their mantra is to spread happiness through socks. So anyway, with all that said, I'm very curious how you think, particularly as some of these kids get a little bit older, like John is, the role of being able to go to work, or maybe even to start a company like this.
Well, that's our next initiative, because there are services for kids with special needs generally quite good here, at least here in Wisconsin. But after they turn 18, you fall off the cliff. There's nothing there except video games in the basement. And so we have a particular therapist, Brian, who has been working with these kids, some of them since they were 4 or 5 years old, and now they're teenagers, and now they're graduating from high school. And somehow he has a way of finding that island of intactness in them. And he's put together what he calls a leadership group of 8 or 10 or 15 of these now 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and teaching them leadership skills, as well as trying to share their expertise. One one lad that knows everything there is to know about automobiles. If you want to know anything about automobiles, you ask him. He's now working for a car repair company here and making diagnoses sometimes of what's wrong with the car. We have another little fellow who had some musical ability, and so he did some training for him, and having him actually come to the center and entertain the kids and do some other little gigs here and there. So he's making some money now with his, and to our complete surprise, one of his fellow workers brought in a picture of his dog, and this fellow sat down and made a portrait of the dog, which is simply astounding. And we had no idea that there was any talent of that type. And so he was doing these for gifts. And we said, those are worth money. So now he's getting money doing these portraits of pets. We have another lad who was very expert in computers, and now is working for a computer sales and repair company. So, and the difference, and we take these, there's 5 or 6 or 7 of these fellows, and we go to businesses and the board of directors meetings and say, we'd like to have you meet our people. And then they say, we might have some spots in our organization for that kind of thing. And so instead of the old sheltered workshop, which was fine for kids to go to the shelter workshop and sort socks and do all those other kinds of things. Now they're in the world. They're in the business. They're doing the packing at the grocery store or whatever. So that and what that does for their growth toward independence is as well as their own satisfaction. So our next initiative is to set up programs like that. Vocational rehabilitation, which is a state agency in Wisconsin, now is devoting some funds and special effort toward these. They had not really been that involved with developmentally disabled folks the way they are now. So that's a really, and I think Microsoft 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, launched their specific talent search for people with Asperger's to join the company. They had 800 applicants, and they employed, I don't know what the number is, but the success rate with those is and there are other, there's a father with, much like the story that you told, and his son, I think it was in Sweden, who started a employment agency specifically and only for children with or now young adults, and they have some branches here in the States recruiting and looking for because some of these kids have graphic skills, for example, that are astonishing, or computer programming, or other kinds of, or musical interest or art. So that I think we're seeing some really great stories coming from that.
I'm so excited to hear about this. It's a new area of understanding for me. I think of myself and so many others that I know. One of the things that Mark Cronin said, John's dad, was that they sort of had to create this company as a way to have John be fully expressed. And after he shared that with me, I thought, that was true for me. I mean, not that I have this kind of a situation or condition in my life, but, as an 18-year-old, I got thrown out of school for being stupid. I found out at 21 I was dyslexic. And I had very little options. I could do a manual labor thing, or I could start a company, because nobody was going to bet on my potential because there wasn't evidence of it. And so I sort of had to be an entrepreneur, if you will. Entrepreneurship was a way out of a life of struggle. And I think about how much of our identity, how much of my identity comes from the ability to create something of value that people appreciate and enjoy, and of course get compensated for it, and what that does for your self-esteem. And so I relate to it on that level, and I find this incredibly, incredibly exciting work.
Yeah, and it is really the growth that we've seen in this group, that I've seen in this group. They branched off into making some videos now. Somebody does the writing, somebody does the acting, and somebody does the filming, and somebody does the editing, and the things that they've produced. We had an art show just with their ability recently, in which they filmed. And, I mean, it just is really amazing, and it's not just sentimentality kind of that is touch. I mean, it's such a practical and such an essential part of our being. There's more to me than what I do, but what I do is important and fulfilling, and that I think is true of everyone. And I think we see more of these young adults emerging from the basement away from the video, and interacting and socializing, and contributing, and not just as a charitable kind of thing, but I mean a genuine contribution.
Well, Mark Cronin's comment to me, Doctor, was that this, if you will, pool of talent or of employees is a highly motivated, highly focused, fun. And he said, look, I'm paraphrasing his comments, their philosophy at John's Crazy Socks. We want these kind of people as employees because they're great employees. And he's trying to be an evangelist to other business owners that you're missing out on a huge talent pool. And to your point, it's, yes, you feel good doing it from a heart perspective for all the logical or obvious reasons. But the reality, in Mark's point of view, is it's just good business because they're good employees.
That's right. And good employees are hard to find.
And getting harder with the employment rate at what it is.
Right, it is. That's true.
Now, I'm curious, just to change topics for a second, and I know this is not necessarily your area of expertise, but it's been so prevalent recently in the news. The CDC coming out with a report about the massive increase in American suicides, the high-profile suicides of, some musicians and some celebrities over the last several years. Do you have a thought about what's going on in our culture and our world around suicide, Doctor?
Well, it's such a complex phenomena as well as an individual phenomena that it's hard to come up with. I wrote an article years ago about child suicide, and I attributed it at that time to what I called the American fairy tale. And the American fairy tale has some elements to it that I think end up to be disappointments. And I was talking then about some of the emptiness and shallowness of our time. And I think that that's simply been accentuated with some of the violence that's portrayed in our society, some of the hopelessness, and so I think we've become sort of desensitized to death and desensitized to the little things in life. That sounds kind of corny maybe, but I think that the value of the the things around us, including the love that we talked about, and the some of the emptiness. That article, which I can share with you if you want to see it sometime, because it got a lot of publicity back in those days.
I'd love to see it, and I'd love to share it in our show notes too.
Yeah, it was based on a suicide note of a girl who said left a suicide note, and she said, "Mom and Dad have never said anything to me about having to have good grades," and she was a straight A student, and she got her first B on her report card, and she hung herself, leaving the note. She said, "If I fail in what I do, I fail in what I am. Goodbye." And this kind of that sort of emptiness. Anyway, I'll share that with you. And what I call the American fairy tale has elements of some of the emptiness and shallowness, and moving away from some of the vital ingredients, and an appreciation for life. And I think we've desensitized ourselves to death and violence, and it just doesn't seem as final, and it doesn't seem as fatal. and it's I think that has a lot to do with where not just with suicide, but I think the violence in our society, and the murders that are in all of the cities daily. I don't know. So, but I'll share that with you and see what you think.
That would be great. I'd also be curious, with all this focus now on mental health, what do you think is good for the average person, good mental health hygiene, so that we, so much body of research and work on physical health and nutrition and, training our bodies and wonderful things like yoga and Pilates, and of course all the sports we can play, and going to the gym and improving ourselves physically, and being active, all that good stuff that many of us of course try to do. But there seems to be less of a conversation in our culture about what are the things mentally I can do that are the equivalent to keep myself in good mental health. Do you have some, advice for the average person on what are the things that I can do, like go to the gym and eat my vegetables and like that?
Well, yeah, I do. There's another thing I will send you, which after listening to patients for 50 years, like any doctor, treating people and seeing them recover and so forth is exciting and fulfilling. But near the end of most physicians' career, you begin to think about prevention. As thrilling as treatment and cure is, what can we do to prevent this from happening in the first place? And in mental health, so anyway, I've put together a formula for what I call mellowing. And there's a song, Have You Never Been Mellow, by Olivia Newton-John, and she talks about finding a comfort inside you. And so I've put together the elements of what I call becoming more mellow, and it includes some of the things that you mentioned, as well as an appreciation for some of the not necessarily finer things in life, but the simpler things in life, like an orchard or a waterfall, or sometimes being able to do something frivolous without feeling guilty about wasting time on something frivolous.
Isn't it great to waste time, doctor? Isn't it great to just sometimes say, I'm going to waste some of my time here?
Right. Nowadays there's all this emphasis on mindfulness. And I've written a little article which I call mindlessness, which I think we ought to, the antidote for mindfulness is some mindlessness. Just sitting down at my little bench down by the waterfall and just coasting and not thinking anything all that significant or relevant or whatever, but putting it in neutral and just free flowing. And I think we are need some moments of mindlessness instead of always thinking of mindfulness. So those are the kinds of things that they're simple things, but they I think add up to this. My definition of mental health is being relaxed, at ease, and pleasantly convivial. And that's contained in the definition of mellow, which is why I use that term. And I think if we try to become relaxed, at ease, and pleasantly convivial, to me, that is what mental health is. And there are various ways to achieve that, sometimes through activities, sometimes through faith or belief, or our religion or our spirituality, sometimes with active pursuits or hobbies or whatever. But this mellowing thing is something I also wrote years ago. It started out in a mimeograph. Remember the mimeograph?
I sure do.
Yeah,
mimeograph. It's been a long time though, hasn't it?
Yeah, mimeograph copies, which I used to do a lot of public speaking, and at the end of people would say, "Can we have this in writing?" And so but anyway, it's in a booklet form. I still have self-published it because I had gone to the big companies and they had expressed an interest in it, but they told me how I had to revise it, and I had to have a quiz in there, to see how mellow you are or aren't, and all those things. And I said, that's what I've been preaching against. So no thanks. So
that's silliness, right? That stuff is silliness, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
How can you have a substantive conversation about something like this and then reduce it down to some asinine kind of a pop culture quizzy thing, right?
Exactly. That's part of where we are, why we are at where we are. You had asked me last time, or we talked a little bit about, I like your title, Legends and Losers, and I was trying to think of losses and how that might have impacted my life. And yesterday was Father's Day, and my dad died when he was 57 years old, so he died prematurely. But he was just a great role model and a great father. And he gave me what I think are probably the 5 words of advice that were the most valuable thing he ever said to me. And it happened this way. He worked in a machine shop and was a really good machinist, and worked his way up into the company, became a foreman. He was very proud to be a foreman because it was a large company, and it was a foreman position. And the head of the manufacturing was due to retire. And he was the logical person to fill the position. And he sort of anticipated that, and we all did. But anyway, when it came time to fill the position, the company said, Wally, they said, you're really the person that ought to be in this position, but you've only got an 8th grade education. And we can't have somebody in that position with an 8th grade education. That doesn't look good for the company. And so he never got the position. But after he told me the story, he said, I got a piece of advice for you, Darold. And I said, what is it? He said, get that piece of paper. Get that piece of paper. Get that certificate, because that's the ticket that people respond to. And it motivated me to sit in the park and look in anatomy books instead of other kinds of things. And so
And do you think
get that piece of paper, I think, was
that was a big driver for you wanting to ultimately become a doctor and to be, to have you have credentials like very few others have credentials.
Right.
And that was a big motivator?
It was. I was the son of a machinist. There were no doctors in the family. There weren't any ways to get into medical school other than to work your butt off to get there. And I found that is true. That's the way our society is set up. The other thing that was so that I thought about though yesterday also was he only did have an 8th grade education, but he was a fount of wisdom in many different ways. And in my practice of psychiatry here in sort of rural Wisconsin, many of my patients had 8th grade or 3rd grade education, but I simply marveled at their knowledge about farming, or their knowledge about nature, or their knowledge about all sorts of things was just, was the kind of thing you don't cultivated over time. And they were, there's sort of a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And they may have not had some of the knowledge that we associate with education, but they sure as hell had the wisdom. So that, get that piece of paper, I think, in one sense, that's the same what's motivating when we talk about moving these kids as young adults into the workforce now. It's getting that piece of paper and or at least that credential. And sometimes we're shooting not just for a GED certificate, but we're talking about a diploma and going on and getting into the. I have a fellow that I've followed since he was 11 years old. He's now in his 30s, I think, and he has his PhD in mathematics from UCLA, having written a thesis that I don't even understand the title of, let alone anything else. But he made his way. He made his way to the top. Or Temple Grandin, who's has her animal science degree along with her ability to talk about autism. So that getting into the conventional workforce with everybody else, they're differently abled, but that's a different word than disabled, and I see them as differently abled rather than disabled. So I guess my story about losing is really my dad's story, and what that did in terms of helping to motivate me to do what I've done.
And that's a wonderful story, Doctor. Thank you so much. And I'm curious, all children, of course, one of the primary motivators we have in life is to make our parents proud. And
yes.
How old were you, Doctor, when you lost your dad?
Actually, I was in my first year of my psychiatric residency. It's interesting, though. One of the things about him and about many people like him, he was of German stock, as I am, and there was a tendency in those days, not necessarily you may be very proud of your children, but somehow you didn't really share that. And you learned about how proud they were because they told your aunts how proud they were, instead of telling you. So part of my recipe for mellowing, as you will see, is saying it directly. I had a patient one time who was depressed and in the hospital, and we treated her, and she recovered, and was time to go home, discharge, and I was at the nurse's station with her there, and we were waiting for her husband to come and pick her up. And I said to her, is there anything that would help keep you from getting depressed again? And she said, yeah. I said, what is? She said, well, if her husband, John, if every now and then he just told her that he loved her, that would help. And I said, well, doesn't he say that? No, I said, when is the last time he said that? And he said, well, that was years ago, before the last time he said that. And yet, when it was visiting time, he always came up and he had orchids or gladiolas. I mean, he looked like he was happy as hell to see her, and they, looked like they were very. And so anyway, I called John aside. I said, John, I said, your wife just told me that something I find a little hard to believe. I said that she said it's been years and years since you told her that you loved her, and yet it looks to me like you do. And I said, John, how come? Well, Dr. Treffert, I'll tell you how come. He said, I'm a man of my word. I told her that once. There's no need to keep repeating it all the time. And that's just a good German stock kind of, you just don't need to say it out loud. And I say, yeah, you do. You need to say it out loud. And if you're proud of your kids, tell them. Don't just tell the teacher or somebody else how proud you are. So I think that that's changed now. I think parents are much more likely to share that directly. But
it's interesting. My experience is like yours, is that has changed. But interestingly enough, I'm not sure if you're aware, Dr. Treffert, there's this wonderful web platform question and answer website called Quora.com. And anybody can ask any question about anything, and anybody can answer any question about anything. And sort of the people who use this site vote up and down questions and answers. And it's a very sort of fascinating social experiment that I quite enjoy. It's become popular. Anyway, I saw a question on Quora a little while ago, and the question was along these lines, and I'll paraphrase, but it was something to the effect of, can you say I love you too much? That is to say, if you say it too often, that it loses its strength, or it loses its value or impact. I'd be curious as to your answer to that question.
No, I don't. I think you can say it too much, or that it loses its effectiveness, or it becomes so trite. I think there's a certain, intuition or instinct that tells you when you ought to say that, and with sincerity. So no, I don't think that one can overdo it. I suppose maybe in some kind of acting sense or whatever. So anyway, my answer would be no. I don't think that can be overdone.
Yeah.
I think the response that one is looking for can be so reassuring. I had we had 4 children, and my youngest son, one night, or we had a little ritual every night when he went to bed. He'd always say, "Good night, Dad. See you in the mornings. I love you. And good night." And I'd say, "Good night, Jay." And one night he said, "Good night, Dad. See you in the morning. Sweet dreams. I love you." And I said, "Jay," I said, "I love you too. I love you very much. In fact," I said, "I think you're one of the neatest people on this whole planet." And he modestly said, "I know." And that is just, to have that, that's another part of the mellow, is the I know experience, that being able to know it, to have, as one of my patients described it, as smiling inside. And so I think that saying that is, I don't think you can say it too often.
Amen. I agree with you. I mean, that's been my experience in life. I grew up in a very affectionate family, a very loving family, and not just the women, the men. My dad's, a guy who expresses himself. My grandfather, who I was also deeply close to, He fought in World War II, and even a man of his, if you will, vintage, so to speak. It was always very clear to me how much my grandfather loved me. And I think back and I think how much of my constitution in life, my confidence, my foundation, if you will, comes from the fact that whatever happened to me in my early life, and we all go through whatever we go through, but I always knew how much my parents and my grandparents loved me.
Yeah, and that's such a gift. I mean, that is such the I know kind of, it is so anchoring for us and around things that happen around us, and having that sense of, and that when you sort of talk about or as we talked about what's missing, I guess that, I think, like little Billy, nervous breakdown when nobody loves you, is a huge element. And there are so many threats to the family, and just time itself, as well as economic and other kinds of sorts of pressures on the family, and some of the distancing that we're doing, looking at our iPads instead of looking at each other's eyes. I mean, that all sounds very corny and simplistic, but it's not. It is. I think the kind of communication that. I think text messaging is great because that's very immediate and very, but some of the other distractions are taking us away from that. And I'm glad to hear, your sense of that coming from your family and what meaning that has.
Well, and I'll tell you, Doctor, I think it sounds corny to some, but one of the reasons I wanted to do Legends and Losers and do it the way we do it, which is, you and I sitting here having a conversation like two human beings looking at each other in the eye and trying to dig into things that we think are important and interesting, is exactly what you just said. I had this aha somewhere along the line, and it was true for myself. So I'm not trying to put myself as being different from anybody, but that over time, partially because of our lifestyle, partially because of technology, I started to notice very rarely do people put down their devices, look each other in the eye, and have a real conversation about things that matter to them in their life, their career, or whatever other aspect of the world. And there used to be this word you heard that I never hear anymore, and the word is conversationalist. I used to hear people say, "Oh, I'm trying to be a better conversationalist. I want to know how to do what we're doing today in a better way." And it seems like, I don't know, I feel like I sound like an old guy when I say this, but this notion of being a conversationalist, this notion of having a dialogue, this notion of putting down the technology and chatting with each other over a coffee or a beer or a walk, or just sitting in the living room and looking to somebody in the eye and saying, "How are you?" and letting that conversation unfold. I know we're all busy and we're all running around and we're all commuting and we're all doing our Facebook updates and all these things, but at least for me, with Legends and Losers and in my life, I just got to this place where I thought, you know what, I want to have more real conversations. And so it's very heartening for me to hear you say that, Doctor.
Good. Well, I congratulate you for that, because I think that is, when we were talking earlier about what seems to be happening or what seems to be missing, I think there is that heart-to-heart, conversation, and that's missing. And I guess if I had to put a label on it, it might be something apathy. Rollo May is psychologist, and he wrote a couple of books on love and will, and he said, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And that is so true, that I can disagree with somebody that I love, and we can have our disagreements. But in terms of if I become apathetic or uninterested, disinterested, and remote and distant, that's the opposite of love. And that, when I talk about the American fairy tale, I guess that's what I'm sort of saying, is that we become more apathetic, and by that I mean distant, remote, disinterested, distracted from this kind of thing that you're talking about, just having a conversation. A friend is somebody who knows the worst thing about me and still thinks I'm okay. And if I can level with another person about my self, and not fear the rejection or the ridicule or whatever, that's reassuring, and that's vitalizing. And in a relationship, that's the real strength of the relationship. So I think if I had to choose a word for what's happening and what's getting us into trouble, I would probably use the word apathy.
That's a very, very powerful insight, Doctor. It's interesting. My dear friend and mentor, Bix Bixson, he says one of the definitions of love is being loved for exactly who you are and not who you're not.
Yes, right.
There's no, oh, she's wonderful, but there's an asterisk with a few little things on it that maybe if she was this, that, or the other, then she'd be perfect. Mm-hmm. No, you're perfect for what you are and for what you're not, and you're okay with me for what you are and what you're not.
Right.
So, Doctor, I want to be very respectful of your time. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap?
No, I think we've covered a lot of territory. I'm going to send you the article on child adolescent suicide that was written a long time ago, but in many ways is not really dated. And I'll send you the Mellowing book also, just see what you think.
I would love both of those. Any of those links you want to send, we'll include them in the show notes. And in the spirit of full candor, as we've been talking about, I want you to know I'm having a bromance with you. I don't know if you're having one with me. I love who you are. I love the work that you do. I love how you, the deep-hearted way in which you conduct yourself. And I want you to know I would love to have you back on a regular basis to just continue this conversation. If you're willing to do that periodically from time to time with me, Dr. Treffert.
Oh, sure. I'd be very glad to do that. As I said, the longer I was in the field, and the more the preventive, and that's really what we're talking about here, is preventative or remedies, before the fact rather than after the fact, in terms of, so I like to do that, and that's what these writings are about. I gave up pretty much traveling and public speaking, and just because the hassle was it's not fun anymore. At one time, at least, was tolerable, and now it's not fun. But there was a friend of mine, and we were both on the circuit talking about preventative mental health and stress reduction and becoming more mellow and all that sort of thing. And we happened to meet in the O'Hare airport, and he was rushing to get his plane. I was rushing to get my plane. And we're both talking about prevention, and we sort of looked at each other and said, this really, there's something wrong with this picture.
This might be the opposite of mellowing right here.
Exactly. So I have to practice what I preach. And so the way I practice it, so I really like the other thing is, in terms of the work that I do in the media work, is so often, the 3-minute segment on the evening news, tell us everything you know about autism and do it real quickly if you don't mind. And you can't answer those things. So our ability to dialogue and to free associate, so to speak, is an opportunity I really like.
Well, I'm so glad you feel that way. That is absolutely how I feel. If you feel like there's an article cooking up in your head, and maybe you want to write it or maybe you don't, but it's a topic you think is important, and maybe in the past you might go give a speech or write an article, but you want to dialogue it out with me, I'm always open to that. I think it's not that writing isn't great, not that public speaking isn't great. Those things are great. I'm an author, I'm a speaker as well, and those are important things. But there is something extra special, at least for me, in the way that I learn and become a better human being when I can sit and be with somebody and open something up and unpack it and maybe chase a diversion and have a laugh and do those things. So I guess my point is, Dr. Treffert, when going forward you have ideas for topics you want to shine a light on, and maybe in the past you would have gone and done some speaking or done some writing, and you feel like you want to have a conversation with somebody, my hand is raised.
Good. No, I appreciate that invitation, because I've got all these ideas and cases and examples in my head, and I just don't have time to sit down and write them out. And so being able to talk them out is much easier, and I think much. When you're doing writing, as you know, the word count is the enemy. 3,000 words and tell us everything you know about savant syndrome. It just so I welcome the opportunity to just sit down and converse.
Well, I love chatting with you. You're a gift in my life, and the fact that people are listening is an extra bonus for me, but I get to have you and share you with the world. And, to your point, I've seen you on 60 Minutes. I've seen you on CBS Sunday Morning. And look, these are wonderful shows. And I remember the first time I saw you, I believe it was CBS 60 Minutes. And as wonderful as that program is, and I do think it's wonderful, after your segment was done, I turned and looked at my wife, and we almost said the same thing to each other, which is, here is this clearly extraordinary, committed man, and we got like 3 minutes with him on this topic.
Right. Yeah. It is that. So I appreciate this opportunity, and I think I have your mailing address, or send me your.
I'll send it to you again.
Best mailing address, and I'll get these things out to you. And if some idea. And I've got some ideas that pop into my head as we're talking here that we might discuss, and I'll be in touch with you about those.
You're welcome back anytime. We can do an ongoing mini series if you like.
Sure. Fine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Treffert, and a little slightly belated Happy Father's Day, and bless you.
Good. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Whew. If you love this conversation as much as I do, why not share it right now? Why not email it to somebody that you love? And we would deeply, deeply appreciate it if you shared this episode with Dr. Treffert on social media right now. Now, our good friends at NetSuite want to help you turbocharge your business. The only thing harder than sort of finding the vein, designing your category, and developing your business is, once it starts to grow, managing the growth. And NetSuite is a company founded by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. They offer a complete suite of application functionality to help with every part of your business, from accounting and inventory to connecting to your website, to omni-channel sales, to customer support, and even HR. NetSuite is offering you, our listeners, a 1-hour free growth review where you can talk with an expert in your industry about strategies, challenges, and opportunities to grow your business. So go to netsuite.com/legends to set that up. the folks at Investopedia say that money management and fatigue are two of the biggest challenges facing growing businesses. NetSuite is purpose-built to help you deal with both with both fatigue, money fatigue, and and management fatigue and growth fatigue and any other fatigue you have. Check out netsuite.com/legends today and set up your free growth review, because it is grow time. Also, check out our website, legendsandlosers.com. We would love it if you subscribed. As you know, we have to compete against some of the biggest media companies in the world. If you love independent podcasts like Legends and Losers, I would encourage you to be a podcast hero. Introduce two people you love to two podcasts you love. And for people who haven't experienced a podcast, it can be challenging to figure out where your podcast app is on your smartphone, maybe download it or check it out on Spotify, subscribe, etc. So if you know somebody who would love a podcast, why not help them subscribe and get set up? And I must tell you, your reviews make a giant difference to me, to everybody at Legends and Losers, and they increase the likelihood that people find us. So we would love it if you did that. All right. We would like to thank Dr. Treffert's book, Islands of Genius, The Bountiful Mind of the Autistic, Acquired, and Sudden Savant. Check it out wherever you get legendary books. Our good friends at Equity Directory. If you're in the startup ecosystem, check out equitydirectory.com. The amazing people at onelifefullylived.org. We're the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Spiro, the sales app for salespeople and sales managers who like to make money. Check out Spiro.ai. Interview Valet. If you're a thought leader, get your leading thoughts on leading podcasts. You be the guests, and they will do the rest. Check out interviewvalet.com. A podcast that I love, Stop Riding the Pine, with our good friend, the co-producer of Legends and Losers, my dear buddy, Jamie J. Check out Stop Riding the Pine. And one of my favorite charities, Doctors Without Borders. They make a difference in the most challenging parts of the world. Check out doctorswithoutborders.org. All right, I'd like to remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the crap out of it right now. We must remind you that all rights do remain disturbed, and that this oddcast is clearly produced in a studio that does contain nuts. However, it is never tested on GMOs, but may contain forward-looking statements, backward-looking statements, present moment-looking statements, and completely preposterous statements. Remember to listen to Johnny Cash, support your local genius, remember to follow your different, don't be lame, get out of the passing lane, only buy pasture-raised, free-range eggs. Don't forget the sage words of David Lee Roth, who said, "Hey man, that suit is you." Thank you, Dandy Candy. I love you, Mom and Dad. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Marcus Rust, CEO of GoodEgg.com. Sorry, Marky, we just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for investing your life with us, and I look forward to seeing you again on Legends and Losers.